Hello guys, let's now talk about how to use forms in HTML. So for context, a form is simply a sort of document that we usually give people to fill in order to collect specific information about them or about something in particular. Now with regards to HTML, we are going to be seeing how to create forms, but which are going to be, I will call them digital forms, which are forms on a web page. Typically you will see HTML forms on things like login screens of applications or websites. For example, when you want to log into or you want to create a Facebook account, you are usually going to see a sign up or login form where you are asked to give some information like your name, your email address, your date of birth, and so on. So that is an example of an HTML form. So we are going to be trying to create something similar to that in this video. Now obviously we are not going to be creating an exact Facebook login page, but the intention is simply to see how to create a form in HTML with as many type of different HTML input types and tags as possible. So in order to use a form in HTML, we start by creating the form using a tag which is known as the form tag. So we simply write form, and if I click on enter, it creates the tag for me. Now we see this tag is created with an attribute which is the action attribute. So the action is simply an attribute which specifies where the information collected in this form is going to be sent to once we finish collecting. So you can be sending your information to another file. It can be another PHP or JavaScript file, or it can be another file for your backend or your server for a full stack web application if you're building that. And in that case, you would need to write the name of the file here. For example, if I was sending this to a PHP server file, I could write something like server and then .php. So this is going to submit this form to server.php file when it's complete or when it's submitted. But for the moment, I don't want to specify any other file where I want to send the form to, because here we are focusing just on HTML. So I will just write an hashtag sign. So you write the hashtag when you don't want to precise any particular place where the form is to be submitted, and then I will come in between my opening and closing form tags, and we can start writing other things in between. Now I want to create a form that is going to collect as many details about a person as possible. So for example, let's say I want to ask somebody for their name. In order to do that in this my form, I can start by writing a label. So I will write a label. It's an HTML tag, and the label is simply a tag that we use to write or to precise the type of information that we want the user to enter in the given input field in our form. For example, if we come here, I can write something like name inside my label, and if I save this, we see that name is displayed on our browser. So I write name followed by this column, and then after this I will provide a space where somebody can write the name. Now let's do that. To provide the place where a person is going to be able to type something, we are going to use a tag which is known as input. So we have input type text. This type is an attribute that defines the type of value we are expected to write inside this input field. So let's save this first, and we see this was the label we got which says name, and then after the name there is an input field which is provided where somebody can type a value. So that's how it functions. And then when we say type text, it means inside this place we are expected to receive a text value. Now we also have different other input types which we are going to see as we go through this video. Now something else I want to talk about is this for attribute in our label tag. We see we have an attribute for which is set to nothing for now. This for attribute is used to link our label to our input field. So for example, I will write label for, and then I will set this equal to name, and I will come to my input tag also. After the type equals text, I will write another attribute which is the ID, and I will set ID to name too. So usually the value which is inside the for attribute in the label is supposed to be the same as the value which is inside the ID attribute for the input field, and this simply tells our browser that this particular label is associated to this input below it, so that they should be at least linked in a way, because without this for attribute and this ID attribute in the input field, the label and the input field are not linked in any way. So this is simply to make them connected. And then after this, we can also add some different attributes in our input field. The next one we are going to see is going to be the placeholder. So I will say placeholder, and then I can set this to a value like let me say Elon Musk. So we can see what has happened here. We have name equals, and then inside our input field we have Elon Musk that is written in the background here. Now this name Elon Musk is simply a sort of directive that we are giving to our viewer, so that if somebody sees this input field with Elon Musk in the background, he can be able to maybe guess that he or she is expected to enter a name inside here. And once you start typing any name like John, for example, the name Elon Musk in the background has disappeared automatically. Another thing we can use also is the value attribute. So instead of placeholder, I will write this as value and I will save this. Now we see is something similar displayed. We still have name equals Elon Musk in the input field, but now this Elon Musk is an actual value that is already written in the input field. It's not just in the background. So if you start typing another name, Elon Musk has not disappeared. We have to first cancel all of this before we start writing our own name inside. So that is the difference between the value and the placeholder attribute. And the next attribute in the input field we are going to see is the name attribute. So I will say name and I will give this the value of name. So this name attribute is simply an attribute that gives a brief description of the type of value that is stored inside this input field for the file where we are going to submit the input to. So as I said, in our action attribute we specify where we are going to submit this form information to, but when we submit it, let's say we are submitting it to a backend or a server somewhere, and this server receives this input value, and it is going to look at the name attribute to be able to understand what is the type of information or data that is stored inside this input field. And when it is going to see this name attribute and it is going to see name is set equal to name, then it is going to understand that this is surely the name of a person that was collected in this input field and then submitted. Now we are going to understand better with the more input fields which we are going to be seeing along the video. And we can also have other attributes in this, like we can have the min length. So the min length attribute specifies the minimum length of characters that are to be given in this input field, while we also have another one which is the max length, and the max length on its part specifies the maximum number of characters that this input field can contain. Now in order to see this function properly, I will first have to put a submit button to this form. So I will come below and then I will write input. This is a new input field that we have, but in the type attribute now, instead of text, I'm going to write type submit and I will save this. So when we have an input of type submit, what this does is it creates a button which we are going to click on in order to submit this form. We see that this submit is shown in the form of a button. So that is what the input type submit is. When you want to create a button that submits a form, or that somebody will click on to submit the form once he or she has finished filling, we use the input type submit. Now let's come back to our min length and max length attributes. So I will let's first try without giving any values for this. I will write my name here. Let me cancel Elon Musk. I will give another name. I'm going to write Desmond and then I will submit this form. Now we see it has been submitted, and we know that it's submitted because once we submitted it, the page refreshed, and when it refreshes we see the default name that was written, Elon Musk, back. So when you submit a form, by default the web page is going to refresh, and that's how you know the form has been submitted successfully. Now if I come to my min length, I will say I want this value or this name to be not less than 5 characters, for example. And for the max length, I will say I want it to be not more than 10 characters. Then I will save this. Now let me write a name that is below 5 characters. Like Musk is a 4-character name. So if I try to submit this, we get an error message, please lengthen this text to 5 characters or more. And in the same way, if I try to give a name with more than 10 characters, let me just write any random thing here, which is going to be above 10 characters. You see, once I've reached the 10 character, I'm not allowed to continue writing anything. I'm actually clicking some keys on my keyboard, but nothing is writing again because we have already reached 10 characters. If you count these letters, they are 10 exactly. So I can submit this now and it works successfully. Now if I remove this min length equals 5, let me put this min length, I will remove this whole attribute in general, and if I remove the first name, I will remain with Elon. I can be able to submit this even if it is just 4 characters because we have not specified any min length this time around. So we'll submit. Oh, you see it shows the error message, and that's because I cancelled the min length but I did not save the changes. Let me save the changes in my HTML file, and I will submit a 4-character name again. Let me click on submit, and now we see it has been submitted successfully. Now we also have another attribute which I want to talk about, which is the required attribute. I will write required here, and this required attribute simply means that we must provide a value for this input field before submitting the form. Now let me first cancel the required again. I will cancel it back, and then I will come to my, let me save the changes, and I will come to my form, and I'm going to cancel this name from here. I will not provide any name, but I can submit this form, and we see it has submitted successfully because the page has refreshed. But if I now come back here and put my required attribute, this is going to make sure that each time we want to submit this form, the input field must have a value within it before it is submitted. It means you cannot submit the form if this input field is empty. So let me click on submit now, and it has submitted. But if I remove this value that is inside and try to submit without any value, we see an error message says please fill in this field. So that is the use of the required attribute. We use it when you don't want the input or a particular input field to be left empty. Now we have talked enough about the input type equals text. Let's look at other input types which we have in HTML. Now I will write another set of label and input below this. For example, I can say I will write label again. So I will simply copy this set of label and input tags which we have here, and then I will come below and paste them. So this time around, instead of the name, I want to collect the email of a person. So in my message here, I'm going to change name to email, and whatever is written between the opening and closing label tags is simply what is going to be displayed as a message for the user here. So I'll ask for the email, and for the input type I will write email. So there is an input type for email, which makes sure that any email or any value we provide for this input type is going to be in the form of an email. For the for attribute, I'll write email. This is just to link my label tag to my input tag, and I'll also write email here. Now for our name attribute, we want that the server should be able to identify that this input field was containing or contained the email of a person. So for the name, I will change the value of name to email, so that when somebody sees or when the server sees email, it is going to understand that the value of this input field is an email address. And for the value, I will cancel this value attribute. You can keep it if you want, but I want to reduce the attributes we want. Now for the value, I can write a sample email here like yo@gmail.com, and I will save this. Now we see we get our email, and we see that this is displayed very poorly. The first line is just mixed with the second line. The name input is mixed with on the same line with the email label. So in order to separate them, I will use a break tag. So a break tag is a tag we use in HTML when we want to jump to the next line after completing one line. And I will write BR and press enter. This is going to create a space or a line break, and I'll save this. Now we see we have the name, and then we have the email below it, and we can also use the break tag to go to the next line for the submit button, so that the submit button should be below the email input field. So here I will write break 2, and now we see each of them are on their own line. Now for this email, we can also even use the placeholder in the place of value, but I want to just cancel this value attribute just so that we have less things to be concerned about here. Usually all the attributes which we use in this input for the name, they are going to be also usable in the other inputs which we are going to see, most of them. Like we can also use the max length and the min length for the email input, but I just want to cancel them because we have already seen what they are used for. Even the required attribute, no, for the required I can leave it for now. But the point is, most of them, they are usable in all types of input fields. Now if you go back to this our break tag which we use to separate these different lines, I would prefer to cancel this. Instead, what I will do is that I will put each of these label and input pairs within their own div tags, because the div by default is going to give line spacings already, and it is also going to group the tags in an organized way. So I will write a div. This is just my personal preference. If you like, you can continue working just with the break tag. So I'll cut these two lines here, this label and input pair. I will cut it from here and paste it inside my div. Now I will also have another div for the email label and input. Okay, now we see, to me it looks more presentable like this. We have this div that contains just the label and input for the name, while we have this other div below for the label and input of the email address. So this just looks more organized to me. And then below we have our submit button as usual. If we save this, this is going to display just the same way. And now for the email, I will try to submit this. We have the name Elon Musk email. I will not give anything, and I will submit this. Now we see please fill in this field because there is a required attribute on the email. And if I try to write a value or an email address inside this email field, let me write something like, I will write Elon, and I will try to submit this as an email address. You see this gives an error because it has identified that Elon is not a valid email address because it does not have the @ symbol. Usually every valid email is usually something like we have some series of text and then we have an @ symbol followed by some series of text after again. Like if you see an email like, let me say elon@gmail.com. So this is typically the form of an email. So it contains the name Elon before and then an @ symbol followed by the email provider, which is gmail.com. So this is how an email is recognized to be. If you try to submit this now, it has submitted successfully because the email was in a valid syntax or in a valid form. Now the next input type we are going to see is going to be the password type. I will copy this set of div and paste it below. Now for this one, I'm going to be trying to collect a password from the user. So in the place of email, I will put password, and in my for attribute, I will also put password here. For this for and ID attribute, the word or the keyword you use there is not very important, or for most of the attributes even, but the most standard one is the type attribute. Here the type attribute, there are specific or fixed types that are already defined by HTML, and your type must be one of them. We have different types like text for regular text, we have email for email addresses, and now for passwords, which we are seeing, we have the password type. So I will write password. I will change this to password too because our for attribute is set to password. And now for the name attribute, we want our server to understand that this is a password value. So I'm going to write password here. This is simply a small message I'm sending to the server or to whatever file is going to be receiving this input field. And for the email address, I'm going to cancel this required keyword because I don't want to keep inserting an email each time, but I will save this. And now we see an input field for the password, which is added below, and I will just maintain the same name, Elon Musk. The email is not required, so I will not give any value there, but the password, I'm now going to write something here, and you see that by default the password is hidden because this is usually how we see in most applications. Their passwords are hidden when writing. But we also have this I symbol here, which we can use to make the password characters visible, which we can click to be on and off. And then I can submit this now, and we see it has submitted successfully, which means it works. And for the password, we can also use the min and max length character or attributes which we saw earlier. For example, I will say I don't want my password to be less than 5 characters, so I will say min length and then I will give 5. Now if I save this and I try to give a password of maybe 3 characters and submit, this refuses. But if I continue adding the characters to at least 5 and submit, it has submitted successfully. Okay, so now let us look at the next input type, which is the date input type for collecting dates from users. So I will copy this block of code and paste it below. Now I'm going to be trying to collect the date, so I will change everywhere where there is password, I will put date instead. Or I will say date of birth so that somebody can insert his or her date of birth. I've just written DOB for date of birth, and in the for I will write DOB. This time I can write them in small letters. And for the type, instead of password, I will have to put date. Okay, so I have my date of birth. I'm going to remove these other extra attributes, required and min length. They are not very useful here. Of course, you can still use the required attribute to make sure that the date of birth is obligatory. So let's save this now. And we see we have this input field where we can insert the date of birth. The format is given as day, month, and year. So I can give a day like 2nd of June 2020. Yes, I will just leave it like that, and then I can submit it. The password is required, so let me give a random password there, and I can submit it, and it's submitted. And also we can, instead of typing the date of birth manually here, we can simply click on this small calendar icon, and it's going to show us this interactive calendar which we can select a date of birth from. So here I can choose the year and the month. Here this shows for 2026. So I can simply go down and choose another year, or I can go up also and choose a year before 2026. I'm going to choose, for example, 2015. and then I'll choose a month inside 2015 like June, and I will choose the day finally, which is 2nd June, and I will submit this. And of course, let me give a password again. Okay, and we see now it's submitted. So that's how to select dates in HTML. And now after dates, let's also look at numbers. So after the date of birth, I will ask a person to give a number. Let me just say age. I know it's a bit odd to have the date of birth and asking for the age, but I just want to demonstrate how to use numbers, and it's just an example. So for the type, I'm going to use number because the age is of course a number. As Ronaldo usually says, age is just a number. Okay, so I've put age everywhere. For the name attribute is equal to h2, id, and for age. Now let's save this, and we see the age is displayed there. We can simply type any value here like 6, and then I can use this up and down arrows to reduce or increase the number, and you see, and I can also give a default value for this age. Let me say I'll say value equals, let me say 10. And for number types, we can also specify the minimum value and the maximum value we want. We see with the min len and max len, which we saw previously, min len was used to give the minimum number of characters that can be used for a text field or any input field, while max len is used to give the maximum number of characters that can be used in an input field. But here with numbers, we can use other attributes which are similar, which are min. This time we got just min, not min len, and min simply means the minimum number value for this input field, while max, which is just max, not max len this time around, is to specify the maximum number we want to be entered in this input field. So these are used for numeric values, of course. So for the min, I will say 0 because I don't want anybody to write a negative age. And for the max, I will say, let me say 200. I think that's a realistic age to say nobody in the world, at least in the modern years, has ever reached. So let me save this, and we see age. This is the default value we gave 10, and I can increase as I want, or I can decrease, as well as I can just cancel all of this and write my own value myself, 99, and submit. Password is required. Let me remove the required field attribute from this password so that it should not disturb our work again. So I'll give the age of 99 and I can submit, and we can see it has refreshed. And if I try to give a value like negative 8 for the age and submit, it gives an error. Age must be greater than or equal to 0. And in the same way, let me also give an age like 201 and submit this, and it says value must be less than or equal to 200. Now let me give 2.5 as my age and submit. You see it gives an error because the numbers do not take or do not consider decimal values by default, so we have to give whole numbers here. And now let's see the next input type, which is going to be how to collect telephone numbers. So I will ask, or I'll be asking the user to enter their phone number. Let me say I'll write tel, and then the type or the input type is going to be phone. The for attribute I will give phone to, and my ID should be phone. And I also change the name attribute. I want to indicate to my server that this is going to be a phone number, so that is going to be the value I will give there. And for the min and max, we don't really need those here. We don't need min and max phone numbers here because it's really something we cannot determine. And for the value, I will give a default value, or I can just remove this value attribute. I don't want to give any default value for the phone number. So if I save this now, we see this is the input field. I can start typing in a phone number. I'll just give a random number and then I can submit. So that's how to use or ask for phone numbers. Next, we are going to see colors, how to collect colors as input. So for colors, in order to collect colors from users as input in HTML, we use the color type, color without U. Colors in HTML and CSS are written without the U. So I will ask the users to give me the color of their favorite color. Let me just say color for simplicity. I will change the other attributes to color also, the other standard attributes. Okay, and let's save this now. Now we see the color is displayed. We are asked for color and we are given this very dark color here. If I click on this, I can be able to select the particular color I want, but the black is just the default one that is given. So here we can either use these RGB values. For those who know what RGB means, you can simply insert or type the red, green and blue values for your color here. We are not really going to go into the details of RGB, but you can give RGB values here. That's the essential. And you see this is the corresponding color that this attribute or these values for RGB give. And of course, you can give the values in HSL or in hexadecimal, but for simplicity, you can just decide to come over here and you can choose. Let's say I want to give a blue color or a greenish color rather. I can simply drag this to around where green is found and then here I am around the green colors now, and in this other large square box or rectangle box here, you can now choose a particular shade of green you want. Like here, this is a very light green, but if I go down a little bit, the green becomes dark. So you can just scroll around this and play around with it to choose your particular type of green that you want. So I will just leave this one because I like it like that. And yes, of course, I can submit now, and we see it has refreshed and come back to the black color by default. Now let's also talk about radio inputs. Radio inputs are a type of input where we ask the user to select a single value out of a list of, or out of a set of displayed values. Like for example, if you want to ask a user to choose whether he or she is a male or female, you can use something like radio buttons to write male and display a circle, and then female with a circle too, and any of the circles which the user clicks on is going to be representative of his or her sex. So for that, we will need to have a different label and input pair for the male, and a different label and input pair for the female too. So the first label, I'm going to write here male, and then the type is going to be radio, and in the for I will write male too, while in the ID is supposed to be male. But now for the name attribute, instead of simply writing male, I want to write something that indicates what male or female is. So male or female here, I can either write something like gender or sex. I will write gender, because as I said, this name attribute, it tells our server what type of value this is. It's like a variable name for this value, which is supposed to be descriptive of what the value is. So this male or female is going to be a gender value. And if I save this, we see that we have male with a small circle that we can click on this. Okay, so now let me also add another radio button for the female option. What we have so far is just for the male. So I will copy these two lines for the label and for the input, and I will paste them below. And then now I will simply change male to female. Now we have two radio buttons. Let me save it and we'll see the changes. Okay, now we have two radio buttons. We have one for male and one for female. And if I click on the male one, it chooses the male option. And if I also click on the other one, it chooses female. And if we choose female and we submit, it means this is going to send the value female in our server. And what we can also see is that since the inputs and the labels are attached, if I click on the word male, for example, instead of the circle for male, we see that male is still chosen. So I must not click on the circle or on the radio button precisely. I can still click on the label attached to that particular radio button to select it. Now we are going to see the next input type, which is the select input type. Now normally select is not really an input type, it is an HTML tag on its own, but it enables us to display a set of values or options which we want a user to choose among in order to select a particular value. So we usually see this in websites, for example, when we are asked to choose or select our country or location. They are going to provide a list of different countries where you have to scroll through and choose the country in which you are found. So that is usually done using something like a select tag in HTML. Now in order to do that, we are going to be asking a user to enter his or her country using the select. So I will normally start with a div, as we have been doing with all the other ones so far. And then for the select, we also use the label seal. So I will write a label. And for this, I'm going to say label is for country, because I want to be asking for the country of a user. And now after the label, instead of writing an input tag like this, we are going to write the select tag instead. Let me spell this correctly. Okay, so we see the select, it comes with attributes like the name and the ID too. For the ID, I'm going to give country because our for is country, and we know that they have to be the same. And for the name, I'm also going to call it country. Now within my opening and closing select tags, we can see that the first one is the opening tag, and we have the closing tag and we have the closing tag below it. Now inside this select, I'm going to provide a list of different options using option tags. So the option is a particular value inside the select which a user can choose among other values. So for example, I'm asking somebody to enter their country, and inside the select, I will provide different options for different countries. So I will write option, and it creates the option tag. And now we see the option tag has an attribute which is value, which indicates the value of this particular option, or in our particular case, it is going to indicate a particular country which a user can choose. So the first country I will give will be Cameroon, and then I can copy this particular option tag and paste it below to add other countries. So for the second country, I'm going to give Nigeria, and for the third, I'm going to give Argentina. So let me save this and we will see what we get now. We can see this is our country label which is displayed, and then we have this small drop down with a downward arrow. So if I click on this, this is where the different options are to be displayed. And you can see if you count the number of steps that this makes, it gives 3 different steps for our 3 options that we have. But the problem you can see is that we don't have the values of the different options shown here. That is because we have simply written the country names as value attributes. This is going to be indicated when we submit this form, but in order for the user to know what he or she is actually clicking on or selecting, we have to write the name of the country within the opening and closing option tags also. This is just for the readability of the user so that anybody can know what he or she is actually selecting, because when we click on this drop down, we can select a country like this. It has actually selected, if I click on the first step, it selects the country Cameroon, but the user does not see what he or she is clicking. So we have to display the country name here again. So between the opening and closing option tags, I will simply write the country names again. Okay, now we have our 3 countries. Let me save this. And now we see we have the drop down. The first country, Cameroon, is the default one, but I can click on my drop down to choose another country. I can click and select Nigeria. I simply have to click on the given country to select it. Now, if you want to make this be in such a way that a user can be able to select multiple options at a time, or in this our particular case, select more than one country, we simply come to the opening select tag at the beginning here, and then we can add an attribute after this ID. We can add an attribute which is a Boolean attribute, meaning we simply have to type out the attribute, and this attribute is called the multiple attribute. So I'll simply write multiple. It is simply a keyword, and once I write multiple, it is going to enable us to select more than one country at a time. So let me save this, and we can see by default the arrange or the display of the countries is already a bit different. So I can now choose, if I want to select Cameroon, I simply have to click on Cameroon, and then to select another country like Nigeria, if I click on Nigeria, immediately we see that it selects Nigeria instead of Cameroon, but what I want to do is select both of them at the time. So I click on one country, then press Control, and then I can select another country and a third one even. I can select as many options as I want this way. So that is how to use the select for input in HTML. And we can also select multiple options as we have seen. Now the next type of input we are going to see in HTML is the checkbox. So the checkbox is a very common type of input which we have on many websites and applications. Most of the times when you install a new application, or when you are trying to log in or sign into a given application or website, you usually see a small button under that asks you to click on something like agree on terms and conditions. So that small box for the terms and conditions usually is what we call a checkbox. So it is simply a type of input that displays a button which a user is supposed to click on to confirm something in particular. Now let's place a checkbox in this our input form, or on this our form. So the checkbox, like other inputs, is going to have a label, and then for this I'm going to say agree. Now what this label is going to say is going to ask us to agree to terms. Let me just say agree to terms, and then below this we are going to use our normal input tag, but the type of the input is going to be checkbox. And of course, let me add the other attributes which we know, such as the name and the ID attributes. So name is going to be equal to, I will say agree, and ID too. Now let me save this, and let me go back to our select input, and I want to remove this multiple keyword just for it to be displayed better. So now we have agree to terms. This displays our checkbox, and let me also write this within a div. I forgot to write it within a div. You can see that it is on the same line with our submit button, which I don't want. So I'll put it inside a div to make the spacing to be better. This is just a reminder of why we use the divs in this input form. So I will save this again, and now we can see we have our checkbox which says agrees to terms. This is the label, and if I click on this, we see that it has been checked. So that is why we call it checkbox. And finally, the last input type, this one too is not really an input type, but it is another different tag on its own that is used for input too, which is a text area. So the text area is used for text input, which are multiple lines or multiple characters, like they can be entire paragraphs and so on. For example, this is what is usually used in comment sections of different social media, because comments can be very long paragraphs, so we use something like text areas for that. And I will write this before my checkbox. I should have actually shown this before the checkbox, but the checkbox came to my mind first. So let's see how to use the text area. Let me first write my div, and inside it's also going to have a label. The label is going to be for about. Let me say I want to take a small bio or about somebody, and then here I'm going to say about you. Now below the label, instead of input tag, we are going to use another tag, which is text area. So I'll write text area. It's a single word, not separated. And then here we have name. I will simply write about. ID will be about too. Now we can see we have other attributes which come by default with this, which is the columns and the rows. So this simply specifies how large we want this text area box to be. Let me save this first. And we see this is the about label, and below this we have this very large box. So the columns, which we can see cols means columns, this specifies the horizontal length of this particular text area, or how wide this is going to be, while the rows is for the vertical length, or how long it is going to be, or the height in other words. For example, if I can change the columns, instead of 30 I will put, let's say, 50 and save this. We can see that it has become larger horizontally. That is what the cols is for, while the rows is for the vertical length. Instead of 10, let me put 5 for example to make it smaller, and I will save this. We see it is a lot smaller now. And for the columns, I'll change this back to 30 so that it should fit within our screen. Okay, so that is the about you, and here we can write something inside here. I'll just write some random text, and this can be as much characters or as many characters as compared to the normal input type text. Now let's try to submit this form. I will try to provide input values for these different input fields. Now if we submit this, let me click on my agree to terms or on my checkbox, and I submit this. Now we see it has been submitted because the page has been refreshed. Okay guys, so with that we come to the end of HTML forms. Of course, there are other inputs which we might have not covered in this video, but these are the very essentials which you will need. I think we have covered a lot of them so far, and I think you are very good to go with these ones. You must not know everything. If you find yourself in a situation where you need something which is not among these, you can still always Google it, or you ChatGPT it. Let me see. So with that, we come to the end of this video. That is how to use forms in HTML to ask or to take various type of input values from users on a web page.